As we begin our panel, I'd like to introduce the participants as if they needed introduction. To my far left, the Reverend Dr. Brunel Eckert, editor of Gottesdienst magazine, a number of books that are available here today. Pastor of St. Paul Kewanee, host of the Oktoberfest a week from today. The Reverend Dr. Daniel Royning, dean of our seminary chapel for over 30 years, contour of Redeemer under two of the revered pastors on our panel. Also the director of the Fort Wayne Bach Collegium. Father Evanson, who's had some time to speak already today. Father Charles McLean, a student of Arthur Carl Piepkorn, late in his tenure, author of Conduct of the Services, from which many of us learn liturgy, and the Reverend Father David Peterson, pastor of Redeemer Fort Wayne, also editor of Gottesdienst magazine, and writes a regular column. So I'd like to thank them for participating in the panel. Today we've talked and mentioned a number of times St. James Society, the Valpo liturgical movement, and its iteration as St. James Society was folded into Valpo. Father McLean was the chaplain at Valpo when his vicar was John Pless. And Father McLean was also involved with the bride. And I'd like to start and let Father McLean give us just a few minutes of comments on liturgical renewal and then the state of liturgy in Missouri. You need to limit that to 4 or 5 minutes. I know that'll be difficult. And then we'll just pass the mic to Father Peterson and then down the line. And as much as we have time afterwards, we'll take questions for the panel. Father McLean?
Okay, first of all, with all due respect to Father Braden, you know how things get mixed up at times. I was not chaplain at Valparaiso.
Oh, I apologize.
And John Pless was not my vicar. I was, for 1 year, I was assistant to Norman Nagel, which was a tremendous blessing for all kinds of reasons, any of you who know Dr. Nagel. I was, as I've mentioned on several occasions, I was Father Arthur Carl Piepkorn's last STM student, and therefore was fairly close to him during the last year of his life. And I guess one thing I would like to say is that, how can I put this? I think the perception of Father Piepkorn has been clouded by the whole debacle at St. Louis with the walkout and all that followed. Father Evanson and I were talking at lunch, and we both feel that it was probably a mercy of God that he took Father Arthur Carl out of this world before the walkout happened. The legacy of Arthur Carl Piepkorn is one that we have not begun to assimilate. And I think it is a necessary task. He was far from being someone obsessed with rubrics and so on. He, among other things, he taught seminarians, when you go to your first parish, don't make any changes for a year. Your people must first learn to know that you love them, and then you can make some changes. Another name that's come up is that of F.R. Weber. We really, I think in our synod, we have kind of an amnesia about the trajectory of liturgical life and practice. F.R. Weber was one of the great men of the Society of St. James, and his book, The Small Church, is well worth reading. He also wrote a 2-volume history of preaching in the English-speaking world. He was a fascinating man. Also wrote for the American-Lutheran magazine. Father Carl Weidman, the son of Pastor F.W. Weidman, who was also a member of St. James. Father Carl Weidman was professor of classics at Bronxville and for some years the headmaster of the preparatory school there. I guess what I'm trying to convey is that we need to repossess the history of the whole sacramental liturgical renewal, which was going on in the 20s, certainly in the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, and so on. And I'm afraid it's something that's been forgotten. I will indulge myself in one comment in connection with Bishop Steckholz's comment about when we are going to repossess what biblical language for our
Ecclesiastical supervisors.
well, Father Peterson beat me to the punch.
Oh, sorry.
It is amusing to me that if you look through the bylaws of our synod as they presently are constituted, you repeatedly find this thing that a pastor, a teacher, you are subject to your ecclesiastical supervisor. That is a 10-syllable Latinate word. And there is a perfectly good 2-syllable Anglo-Saxon word for that, and that word is bishop. Is there anything else that I wanted to mention? I think Father Peepcorn's work needs to be carefully considered and assimilated. There's an awful lot there.
You mean, what do you mean? His essays from Una Sancta?
His essays from Una Sancta, his articles in the Concordia Theological Monthly, and in the American Lutheran. He wrote an absolutely splendid, he continued a series of articles that F.R. Weber had begun on ecclesiastical arts, and it's very good stuff on what to do with a church building. For example, seating. You don't want to pack out a church with pews. That's not the answer to get as many seating as you can, this kind of thing. But no, I think all of that needs to be repossessed. And Philip Secker, who was his last doctoral student, is making a valiant effort to make the Peepcorn legacy available to us. But as I say, I think that certainly the last years of his life are under the cloud of the whole debacle that took place within our synod. Let's see, is there anything else I wanted to mention? The St. James Society publication, Pro Ecclesia Lutherana, there's some very fine scholarly material in there. These were not liturgical dressmakers. Good stuff. Una Sancta magazine, yes, until Richard John Newhouse took over. I remember that vividly and was so disappointed, but be that as it may. I'm just trying to think if there is anything else that I wanted to mention, but Peepcorn, Weber, Weidman, I think we really need a first-rate history of liturgical, sacramental, confessional renewal. And the thing that has become clear to me in recent years is this liturgical, confessional, sacramental renewal that we are in the midst of now, that this is something that really is in the DNA of the Missouri Synod.
That is what?
In the DNA of the Missouri Synod. I think it was there from the beginning. If you read Walther had a feeling for the worship and the music of the church. Yes, the pietism, I suppose, is there. Father Peepcorn always said that the Missouri Synod Lutheranism is a peculiarly ambivalent combination of Lutheran orthodoxy and Lutheran pietism. Father Evanson? Father Evanson said exactly. So there's much to be learned from these fathers in the faith. None of them would claim to be infallible. None of them. We need a translation of Lochner's Der Hauptgottesdienst. We desperately need that. I think that's about all I wanted to say.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Father. And to Father McLean's point, there is a Walther essay called Does Old Lutheranism Lead to Rome?
Yeah.
It's a very interesting paper where Walther makes exactly the same point. thanks to Father McLean for the evangelical correction.
Just let me just
All right, very good.
Walter's essay, convention essay on Audiophora is one that needs to be read.
Okay.
Excellent, excellent. It's in that 2-volume thing that CPH published. some
Oh, with
years
the
back.
True Visible Church.
No, convention essays. It's a 2-volume, just convention essays that he gave at district and national conventions of Synod. And one is on Audiophora, and it's excellent on the subject we deal with today.
Okay. And thanks to Father McLean for the evangelical correction. He was assistant to Norman Neal at Valpo, not chaplain.
Right.
And John Pless was vicar at Valpo.
Oh, he was
But for-
indeed,
But
yes.
not under you. So I thank him for correcting the record on that. We could go next, I guess, to Father Peterson.
You should go. I'll go if there's any time
You
left.
want to go left?
I'll,
Okay.
I'll yield my
Then we'll
time.
go this way to Father Eckert. And, I don't know how this is going to work, but could we pass this down to Father Eckert?
Sure.
Thank you. Let's see how that goes.
So what was the question?
The charge is to comment on Father Evanson's paper, also on liturgical renewal in Missouri, maybe especially as liturgical journals contribute,
Right.
and then make other comments that you would like to make about liturgical renewal.
Okay. Well, I think, again, with the other voices, Father Evanson for his inspiring and rousing presentation. With Father Peterson, I was surprised when it was over because I was so enwrapped. I don't know if we're worthy to be in your presence. You're so good. Thank you. One of the things I might add to, with regard to a question that was asked of you, which perhaps is on the minds of a lot of people, how do you get your parish from where it is to where it needs to be? I think that's quite a paraphrase. When you're thrust into a situation where the parish is way on the pietist side and you have a long way to go to get it to where it needs to be. I think the answer that Father Evanson gave us right to the point, of course, that you need to have spine, you need to have backbone, you need to say, this is the way it is. I recall, as one who also has plenty of scars, upon hearing from one of my detractors, who was just beside himself with rage, who said to me, "You always have to have your way." My response was, "Well, of course I do. I'm the pastor." Which didn't win me any points, but in the end it kind of did, because there were a lot of other people, silent people on the other side, who wanted a pastor to give the Lutheran way. And so when the congregation split, the silent side found their voice, and they were very happy to have a restoration of good Lutheran theology, the sacrament, the liturgy, and the things that you lose a few years off your life to get back to. But I think we have a kinship in that regard. I'm going to leave the rest of my time for later because we'll need it.
Cantor, would you like to make some comments?
Sure.
Yeah, we welcome Cantor Roining to make the same, address the same question.
I can never deny the opportunity to say a word or two. Dr. Evanson, I lived through many of the experiences that you shared with us just before, and all I can say is ditto. I agree with everything you said, and I thought, that would be nice for you to hear, once in a while. And so, I'm going to be talking about Walter E. Bassine, and I'm going to be very short about any comments I make now, because I'll cover them in my half-hour presentation very, very shortly. What I do want to say is, I think I'm going to be spending more and more time in the last 10 years of my life, or shorter if God wills, to provide musical resources for the parish, especially parishes that have limited resources, limited numbers of singers and whatnot. I was talking to Chris Hobreck about that just earlier. She has a choir very much like the one I have at the church choir at Redeemer. In fact, I was telling her I really have both worlds. That is the parish choir world and then a semi-professional choir world with a Bach Collegium. And I think both worlds need to be provided with resources. And I think with greater intent, as I retire more, that those are the areas where I'm going to spend a lot of my time, making them available on the internet. And already I think you can find on our Redeemer internet my duets of all the hymns of the day of the church year. We also want to supply the Gregorian tones for the intro to the graduals. And the resources can go on and on and on. Chris was complaining that of all the wonderful music that's being published in the publishing houses today, you don't find resources for the church choir that can sing only in one part or only in two parts, or if you really want to get special, maybe three. You know, that kind of thing. And I'm more and more concerned about that and want to help out. And we'll provide you with information as the years pass. If God gives me 5 or 10 more years, I would like to be able to supply these kind of things. Right now, after I retired, I went back to grad school, and my choice was either University of Illinois, where I started a doctorate, or the University of Indiana, because at Indiana and Illinois, they have centers for early music, performing the Baroque and Renaissance music on period instruments. And I wanted to find out and learn about period instruments so that I could provide performances of Bach, our model, our Lutheran model, with the implements, with the instruments for which they were composed. And as far as I know, I'm the only Lutheran connection, or let's say the Bach Collegium that we established in Fort Wayne is the only Lutheran connection to performing Bach as the model with the early instruments. So I'm going to continue with that as long as I can, and invite you to come and hear us. If you haven't picked up one of these, I'm going to turn this into a commercial, but I have several copies of these up here and several copies on the middle table back there. Please take one along, and it will describe what this organization is doing now. In my 31 years as director of music at the seminary, I was unable to do that because we didn't have the funds, nor did we have the encouragement to do that. And so in retirement, I made it as one of my goals to learn as much as I could about it and then provide an organization that would be able to raise the funds to provide that sort of activity, performing Bach as Bach himself performed it. With that,
Okay. Thank you.
thank you.
I'm going to take that home. Yeah, thank you. And just to follow up on Cantor's comments, in my study next to Gerke's Planning the Service, I have a copy of the one-year lectionary resources by the Reverend Dr. Daniel Royning. And I don't know if that's still in print, but it's well worth getting for planning the service.
I should have brought them up. I forgot.
So maybe you could contact Cantor if you don't have that, but it's a very helpful guide. Cantor has selected from the historic chief hymn, the hymn of the day, and also he provides other hymnic resources, suggestions. Father Peterson?
Sure, I'll respond
We'll pass
now.
to you and then we'll take some questions.
I mean, I'm obviously, I didn't experience the liturgical renewal the way that these men have. I'm only actually 28 years old. So, but anyway, I was thinking about some of these things. What's the point of all of this? And really, I'm a couple of things. First of all, we're facing in the Missouri Synod a demographic black hole, right? That even though the bureaucracy continues to grow, the numbers of the Missouri Synod have been in constant decline since 1971. And there's no coming back from it because we haven't had enough babies. So the reality is that the sort of suffering that most of our parishes are experiencing and that all of our districts are experiencing are not going to probably get better. And on top of that, we are facing also sort of just the kind of postmodern difficulties of, distrust of institutions and of authority and kind of consumerism and all of that stuff. And I think, though, it's all bad news in some ways, but at the same time, there's some opportunities in the midst of it. And one of the opportunities in the midst of it is that it actually could, I think, free us to just be ourselves, to be more of who we are, and stop trying to sort of win, America for Lutheranism, and stop sort of being caught up in the entrepreneurial model where, the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod is basically Walmart or McDonald's or Starbucks, and we're supposed to get a franchise in every corner, and we're just supposed to get bigger and better all the time. But to embrace the comfort of the doctrine of election, to embrace our theology and our identity, and to think about just being true to ourselves. And in some ways, the death of the institution might actually free us from the temptation to power and allow us to just be faithful. I think we see that sort of modeled in places like Lithuania. So I think, I don't know if I'm making any sense, but what I would say is that this is not this history here. I've actually been an informal student of this history for a long time now. I guess since I was about 8, since I'm 20. But anyway, that it's not the point of the history for me is that it helps me recognize and understand that I'm not the first one to think these things, and to demonstrate that there is a real heritage and that this is a reality of Lutheranism. But I think it's got to be implemented in the parish. We talk all the time about catechesis, that the way that we catechize the people is by preaching and by how we preside at the service. And I just wrote an article for Gottesdienst. I'm going to start a series on how I'm going to try to talk about gracious presiding. How is it that we preside in a way that is, this is all sort of fuzzy stuff, but that communicates the grace of God in Christ Jesus and the bodily presence. And I think we haven't given enough attention to that. That the liturgics classes at the seminary, they might give you a little bit of theology of worship, and then it's all about all of the options in the book, and then the 10 weeks is over and that's it. And I think also we've sometimes been kind of embarrassed by it. So we haven't thought about it or we've struggled to talk about it. And I think that's where the catechesis takes place, in how the service is conducted and in how the sermons are delivered and what they say. So all of that, I think, works together in a way that's actually helpful and I think liberating. So how's that for...
Thank you. Father Eckert, when is the Michaelmas issue here?
Pardon me?
When is the Michaelmas issue here?
It should be in today's mail.
In today's mail.
So if you can check, because I had it sent, I think Thursday or Friday, and they said it would be here today. So
all right, yeah. So one of the gems in this issue is an article on sanctified imagination and preaching, and it's by Father Peterson, and I think that's going to get a lot of response.
Yeah, you have a bulk mail thing coming today.
Okay.
So if your mail has come, it's here.
Is Chris in the room? Chris is our church secretary. Okay. Okay. I was going to ask if she checked the mail.
Maybe during the break.
Yeah, perhaps during the break. I'd like to open it to questions from the floor for any of the members of the panel. We have about 10 minutes. Questions about the musical contributions of Lismar and Bergen and their contributions to liturgical renewal.
Carl Bergen. Okay. Carl Bergen was a pastor over in New Jersey, Hoboken? Did he follow?
They were there together, and
Were they?
then Shank left.
When Shank like, so he was there together. My first experience with Carl Bergen was when I was a student at Bronxville, and I was given the task of directing the Gloria Dei choir, which is a choir of students that sang every Sunday morning over in the village church. And so when you're given that job, what do you do? What does a choir do? And of course, a choir sings introits and graduals. Well, where are the resources for introits and graduals other than the Basine introits, which I'll mention later? But at any rate, I didn't know anything about Gregorian at that point. As you know, I was probably 16 years old. I was in high school at that time, and so the one name that stood out among all other names was Carl Bergen. Carl Bergen, who was an expert in Gregorian chant. And so I asked Carl to come over and lecture to our choir. I bought the Basine introits, and we had them for the choir, and I said, I want you to direct this rehearsal and tell us how to do it. And so he came over, and we had a wonderful hour-and-a-half choir rehearsal that prepared us for the following Sunday when we did it in the divine service. That's what I know about Carl Bergen, expert in Gregorian chant, one of the few people that even knew what Gregorian chant was all about. This was not popular back then. As I'll mention later, Basine was the first Missouri Synod musician to publish the chants, the Gregorian chants set to the propers. Archer and Reed did them back at the turn of the century, but the first Missouri Synod person, if I am correct, as far as I know, Walter E. Basine was the first one to do that. And Carl Bergen was one of his buddies and supported that and did what he could to encourage it.
Counselor, did you want to make any comments about Wismar?
I do not know anything about Wismar other than he's the one that published and wrote The Small Parish, the architecture of the small parish. Is that the Wismar?
That's Weber.
That's Weber. I do not know about Wismar.
Yeah, thank you. Father McLean wants to comment on that.
Adolf Wismar became the, Father Evanson, correct me if I'm wrong on this, Adolf Wismar became more or less the leader of the Society of St. James after Father von Schenk stepped down from that role. Let us put it that way. Adolf Wismar was pastor of St. Matthew's Church, New York City, which says it's the oldest Lutheran church in America, holding a charter from King Charles II from 1664. But anyway, Wismar was the head of the St. James Society. And under his leadership, the St. James Society, and my guess is that Carl Bergen actually did the work, they did publish a number of the traditional chants of the introits, not just song tunes, but the actual melodies that you would find in the Graduale Romanum or the Liber Usualis. I actually once had a copy of the propers for Ascension Day that they published, but I don't know what's become of them. But this was actually done by the St. James Society under Wismar's leadership. He was an astonishingly erudite man, right, Father Robinson?
Oh, yes.
Wismar.
When I was a student at Valpo, four of us got together and decided we wanted to learn Hebrew. So we went to Dr. Wismar. Wismar had his doctorate in Semitic languages from Columbia University. And he said he would teach us. He met us three afternoons a week. I went into Chicago to Brentano's to pick up the books. And he said, see if they have anything on Sanskrit. So I bought a book on Sanskrit from him. And then he would teach us from 4 o'clock in the afternoon until 5, by which time he would have a coughing fit and take off his linen collar and roll it up in a little ball and stick it in his pocket. And he not only taught us Hebrew, he taught us a lot about pastoral ministry, what it means to be a pastor. And it was a great experience.
Father Bergen's name has come up, and as Dr. Royning pointed out, he was at one time pastor at St. John's Hoboken. He had been assistant to Dr. Schenk. I have in my possession a service leaflet from a service my grandmother attended there in the 30s, and Dr. Schenk was pastor, Father Carl Bergen was the organist and assistant. But in that parish of St. John the Baptist, because of all this, that congregation could sing several different plain psalm settings at the Mass, congregationally, the Missa de Angelus, the Missa Marialis, Missa Glory to God, and so on. So it really, he was a remarkable musician, and also a very, I would say, a kindly, gracious, wonderful person. Carl Bergen. He lived to be nearly 100. He died in the year 2000, 1999 or 2000, but he was close to 100 years old. He has a nephew who was a district president of Ohio District, I think, Ron Bergen, I believe his name was. He was part of the Missouri Synod network.
Thank you, Father. So I'd like to respond just a little bit. Those of you who have been in a study with me have heard me say this before. I think the golden age of Lutheranism was Noah, Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And when the ark hit the mountain, Noah proved himself a Lutheran by getting drunk. And after that, it went downhill. I mean, as we look for the golden age of Lutheranism, that's very difficult to find. But I'll yield to the panel to talk about the future of Missouri and the potential for schism. And if there's anybody that'd like to comment on that.
Oh boy, nobody else take that?
Father? Yeah.
Yeah, you guys have looked through this.
I wanted to ask Father Evanson to tell us what he thinks about that.
Okay, all right. So they've given the hot mic to Father Evanson.
Well, you guys have looked through this.
When I went to Lithuania, I explained to them the way of American politicians. Whenever a politician says, "I'm glad you asked that question," you know that nothing he says from that point on is going to have anything to do with the question. I can only say something that I learned in seminary from George Farrell, who was our dogmatician. He said there is built into American Lutheranism, not just Missouri Synod, but American Lutheranism as such, a mentality of schism. And he reminded us that the group that left the Wisconsin Synod back in the 50s because Wisconsin had not broken fellowship with Missouri never reconciled with the rest of the Wisconsin Synod, which broke fellowship 5 years later, because after all, they broke fellowship 5 years too late.
Right.
And that is, he said, it is, unfortunately, it is something that's built into, well, he didn't use the word DNA because we didn't know anything about DNA back in 1959, but he said it's just built into us. And as long as there are 2 Lutheran pastors left, there is imminent danger of yet one more split.
Can I respond also? Can I respond
Oh,
also?
sure, yeah, response from Father Peters.
On a serious note, you know, we're supposed to yield everything in life, but nothing in doctrine. At the same time, the criticism of whatever they are, Missouri's left or Missouri's church growth or whatever we're going to call the other side, when they have complained about us as being a purity cult, they have not been completely off the mark. I mean, there is some legitimacy in their criticism that we should listen to and we should hear. And I think there is the reality of the church on earth, you know, living in this difficult reality. Our doctrine can be right on paper, but we're never going to have it right in life and in practice. And I'm not, It may sound like, this may sound like a cop-out. I don't think it is. But to say we insist on it being right on paper, we insist on the Book of Concord, and then we accept the fact that it's going to be a constant battle and struggle until the Lord comes back. Because the reality of the individual Christian of the two natures exists also in groups of Christians. So I'm not excusing it, and I think we got to fight for it, but I think the temptation to, establish a new pure synod is just vanity, and it's very much like what Dr. Evanson was saying. From my perspective, at this point in my life, that we're stuck with the Missouri Synod, and the other line that I remember from the Von Schenck biography. Pardon my language, but the Missouri Synod may be an old bitch, but she's still our mother. So.
For the record, I don't see. No, I wasn't accusing you, Roger. Yeah. Thank you, Father. Our bishop has his, you say schism. But we certainly welcome a question from our bishop.
Keep the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace, but be leaders. You who are liturgical leaders in the Lutheran Church Missouri Synod and Wisconsin Synod, be leaders. I think what I'm hearing from the panel is excellence in terms of the whole delivery of worship, preaching, content, the devotion, the right piety with which our worship should show forth, that there's a lot of thought, a lot of care given to all of our worship and our preaching, and that preaching includes practicing, getting up in front of the mirror or whatever you do, get up in the pulpit, because sometimes the content is great, but the delivery really stinks. Combine that with what I'm hearing also, excellence in pastoral ministry. That is visitation, where you win the trust of your people. And as a leader, you can bring the congregation forward, not spending your time on the internet and lamenting about the woes of our church. But as I think Pastor Peterson brought out really quite well, let's be authentically who we are, be the best we possibly can be. But that involves also leadership. It can be quiet leadership, but it's nonetheless leadership.
Thank you, Bishop Steckel.